Welcome to October, listeners. You are tuned into What Magic Is This? A podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. So, we are in the midst of the autumnal spooky season, and all podcasts tend to do this. They tend to orient their content towards the more dark and sinister and spooky aspects. And fortunately for yourself, What Magic Is This is going to be doing the exact same thing. But while other podcasts will focus on, let's just say, the more terrestrial of the spookiness, things like werewolves, vampires, and ghosts, I ask you to move your head back and to look up past the fluttering bats to the night sky, as we will be touching on something that I don't think enough people talk about. On this episode, we'll be looking at the darkness within and between the stars, and our guide is a pioneer for today's topic, Stellar Witchcraft, as well as an enthusiastic explorer of the inspirited and uncanny regions of deep space from a spirit-working and sorceress lens, as much as from a creative exploration of the cosmic horror and speculative non-fiction milieu. We are joined today by someone whose name seems to be on the lips of everybody within the occult, magic, and witchcraft world, Sasha Ravitch. Sasha, how are you today?
I'm wonderful, Douglas. Thank you so much for having me and for embarrassing me with your overly complimentary intro.
Oh, it's what I do here. I just like to bury people in praise. I like to butter you up before we really get in there. It's Thanksgiving weekend coming up in Canada, so there's going to be butter on everything. It's literally on my fingers as we speak. Sasha, Stellar Witchcraft. It's the last 2 years I've been hearing a lot about it, and we've been trying to figure out a way to have you on the show. And this October seems like the time to actually get it going and to let my listeners at least know. Beforehand, I wanted people to have a little bit more of an understanding of things like astrology and magic and the intersections between. But Stellar Witchcraft is one of those things that is fairly tied to one person, and that is you. So when you were younger, did you look at the stars, and what kind of relationship did you have with them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, my childhood bedroom window had this perfect view right above the fig tree in our backyard of the sky that I spent so much time staring at as a lifelong insomniac. But also from a place of wonder and awe, eventually from terror and anxiety as well. But in those formative moments, there was this sort of uh, profound intimacy and vulnerability I felt while gazing at the night sky. Now, of course, I was in like an urban suburban environment. There's only so much you can see, but the limitlessness, the expansiveness, this sense that while I was awake, other things were awake too, even if I was in a very quiet, lonely feeling house, left a really profound impact. I remember also as a child, I had convinced my father to set up the SETI program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the SETI program.
I am, of course.
Okay, great. Well, I am in the right place then.
You are.
And I would have it on literally all night, and I was convinced like you could not tell me otherwise that I wasn't going to hear actual communication to me telling me that like my whoever my real parents were, that's what I was convinced of at the time, right? Would come and collect me. Like there would be a secret message that because I wasn't sleeping, I would be the only one to hear, and I would just be listening to that kind of backgroundy white noise beeping, staring out that bedroom window and waiting. Uh, a little bit later, things as the world of the imaginal and the imagination became stronger, there started to be a sort of dread associated with all of that as well. Which I mean, Stellar Witchcraft is an exercise in sadomasochism, right? Like, let's confront the scariest things in the world from a place of erotic desire and see what happens. But it is as much a part of like my quote unquote childhood origin story as anything else is.
Definitely. So when you look up at the night sky now, what kind of things do you see?
um I see an infinite array of like salivating, gaping mouths, all sort of coalescing into this like mosaic vortex of a gargantuan mouth, of like a giant mouth. And maybe sometimes, like the micro close up of a fly's eye with innumerable smaller, stranger, colder eyes all staring and blinking at me. Um, when I allow myself, right, to gaze into that mouth or that eye, I see entire alien metropolises that have as many terrible spirits as they have beautiful spirits, and some of them are incredibly anthropomorphic, and a lot of them very much like not so, right? But regardless, it is more of an issue of what one doesn't see. I think when I gaze up at the sky, there's no way to begin to see and then unsee. There's no way to begin to know and then unknow what the sky holds within its strange sort of bloated womb.
I love it. It's fantastic, Sasha. Yes. So now that you've set the mood a little bit, all the kids listening need to know, what exactly is stellar witchcraft?
Oh boy, this question is so hard to answer because I feel like it is something
You
that
have been asked it quite often on other podcasts. I've listened to almost, not all, but I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts, and in each time you answer this question, you give a different answer. So I'm putting you on the spot. What for those who
today. What is
have
so
probably for people who have maybe never come across you or your work whatsoever, how would you explain to them what stellar witchcraft is?
Well, I love that you brought up that it's something that seems to change each time. And that's, I think, one of the things that we miss in these older traditions that remain relatively unchanging, right? And our praxis is based in like historical precedents and research. The thing with stellar witchcraft is it's a thing that uh, at least for my part and my mentees and the folks that are working within this milieu now, it's something that we're kind of figuring out each day. So hopefully it does change, but also it becomes very hard to try and articulate a thing which is so malleable. So I don't even want to use the word malleable. It doesn't have the right candor, right? Like something in a constant state of mutation, right? That's I think a more appropriate a way of describing it. But at its core, right, the thing that does not change or transform is that it is a witchcraft practice. So that means that it's a sorceress applied praxis, which results in increasingly being remade in the image of the monstrous other. But in this case, because we're doing stellar witchcraft, the other in question is the spirits which populate outer and deep space. So stellar witchcraft does not just mean witchcraft with stars in their spirits. So that's definitely, absolutely a huge part of it. I've actually taken more recently to call it stellar and deep space witchcraft to accurately communicate that this is a sorcery which considers nebulae and quarks and quasars as much as black holes and spiral galaxies and detritus from like the Oort cloud, right? Or the moons of alien planets from yet unidentified universes. So, for instance, about a year ago, I went through a rite I devised in order to pack with a particular rogue planet, which for those in the know at home, simp J013656.5 plus 093347. You have no idea how long that took me to memorize. Uh,
I'm
uh,
impressed, though. I'm impressed. I don't even know my social insurance number. So
well, yeah, and for all my affinity for words, I do not have it with numbers, which has made learning astronomy a whole journey of its own. But um, I did this pacting right, and the experience was meant to reveal to me what it was like to have this rogue planet, which, for those who aren't aware, is a particular deep space object that was exiled from its galaxy and found its way into the shadow of our own, which is, I mean, as far as planetary witchcraft might go, a rogue planet is a wonderful way of engaging with the idea of the witch as a planet, right? As opposed to like our conflation and our relationship that we often assign to gods and planets. But the goal is to have a rogue planet as like a deep space familiar. Um, so that's an example of like what stellar witchcraft can look like. So the stellar and deep space witchcraft looks at the idea of witchcraft one can do both with the material phenomenal objects of space, so literal things that we have scientific names for things that one could touch that exist, right? These phenomenal objects, as much as the numinous or bizarre spirits would serve like a cathexis, like hostilely occupy these objects and arenas.
Fantastic. That's much to chew on there. I have to ask because when I look at things like witchcraft in historical context, one of the things that comes up to me is this interplay between the witch as victim and the witch, as Peter Gray calls it, it being found. You'll find the witch at the end of a pointed
Yeah.
finger, and so there's so much of this story that comes from not just the witch themselves, but from other people. So the word that I'm trying to pin down here is lore. So not only witches have lore themselves, but what does the lore of stars play into something such as stellar witchcraft?
Lore is extremely important, but this is where we have to get more specific, right? So I prefer, and I like that you used capital L lore. Uh, there's a certain gifted ambiguity to this, which we can really lean into, where folklore has a much, I think, more narrow popular definition, right? That needs to be something that's sort of antiquated, that is likely going to be oral stories told by particular cultural groups of people regarding a certain subject. Lore feels more open. It feels more permeable. It feels like it can encapsulate more. And that's an easier way to define what's happening here. Because my endeavor has been as much about compiling and synthesizing and constellating existing lore, like popular mythology, as much as folk mythology, right? And really, for me, a real passion, something that I find a lot of interest in, is folk astronomy, which is what a lot of people I think are craving and searching for when they want to look for folklore, and they keep getting hit over the head by the same uh, mythological and especially astrological mythological stories. Folk astronomy, which is often in a very different academic school of research, but is compiled in amazing books that are not on most astrologers' shelves, looks at the from a more anthropological view, a lot of the stories that smaller groups of people told about astronomical phenomena, and therefore goes beyond a lot of just the planetary stuff that we're used to. So there's that, right? As well as recognizing, for me, this is incredibly important to stellar witchcraft, the genres of speculative fiction and cosmic horror as being deep wells of lore to pull from. Uh, as well as generate out of, right? Like uh diving boards that you bounce off of when you're delving into something new. And then subsequently, of course, cultivating and curating and like constantly vetting the lore that I'm in the process of creating as a result of my own experimentations, and not just me, but my mentees and my patrons and their research, their lived experiences that are corroborating or perhaps contradicting my own. And slowly but surely, we're building our own kind of corpus of lore within the field itself of practitioners who are alive right now in this process, and discerning and discovering hopefully things that will be wonderful resources for people in the future as well.
Can I put you on the spot for a second here, Sasha? So when you say that there's a certain folklore of the stars, can you give a specific example of where this would be a case? Like even like a perhaps say a European example of a local folklore involving the stars or the night sky.
Oh yeah. So the like folk astronomy, right, would be
Yeah,
looking at
yeah, folk
the
astronomy. Yeah.
yeah, then in the Serbian mountains where the Vlach people are, for instance, looking at the asterism of the Pleiades, and they're referring to them as the Vlach stars and associating them with either dragon spirits or fairy spirits. Um, so this would be a folk astronomical process, and the idea that when the autumn equinox came, right, when we were dealing with the achronical experience of the Pleiades, so there's a setting of the Pleiades. This is when a particular class of fairy spirits or dragon spirits would return to their castles amongst the asterism of the Pleiades. Another example of like folk astronomy would be for some of my particular ancestors being Romani people. The idea that again, going to the Pleiades, because this is one of the ones that there's perhaps the most about, right? One of the most
Yeah.
identifiable since time immemorial.
Seven sisters. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, was a group of women being chased literally from town to town, like the Roma people, right? Wailing and weeping and screaming and trying to survive. So wherever the trajectory on the ecliptic projected that the Pleiades were, that this was witnessed, was a cue around migratory patterns too, that the people observing them would follow as well. Like they were something of a mascot almost of the experience of being forced to be on the run from a pursuer of some sort as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I absolutely love that. Dragon slash fairies. Oh my goodness. That's wonderful. So I think for a lot of people, they might be scratching their heads like, why are we talking about the stars when it's October? We're supposed to be talking about ghosts and jack-o'-lanterns and things of that nature and vampires. But I do think that there is a certain level of starry eyedness when we look up into the night sky. I think a lot of us, we look at things like the planet Mars, and while Mars has this kind of martial aspect to it, for the most part, people are like, Mercury is the communication planet. So we have these kind of, and I'm going very base level here. But for myself, there seems to be a sense of foreboding and darkness. I see a sense of, there's something within me when I look into the night sky that seems very uneasy, and I somehow get this sense of a longing for something that is that does not have merely positive benefits. There's something strangely, I want to say almost atavistic, like something I don't understand, and it seems to have been taken out of my life and from modern living now that I yearn for. So, is it true? Would you say that the stars are far darker than they seem?
Yes. Yes, period. Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that when we see light, we have a very almost global kind of belief system around witnessing light, especially witnessing light in dark places, and paying attention to the light part of that, right? Fixating on it. I mean, we are creatures that revolve around solar cults and the recreation of fire, right? So it makes sense that we are going to want to or gravitate toward the exploration of light. But where light is, we know that a greater shadow is cast, and the brighter the light, the larger the shadow. And in my experience, I have found that even when we are working with blinding, eviscerating, cannot look at it for too long levels of light, whether that be literally gazing at the sun or witnessing an eclipse or scrying stellar spirits, there is a darkness even in the light. There is a blisteringness, right? Like there is a blindingness that happens when met with light that is not of this world. We can engage with electricity here. We can engage with, the flame of a candle. These are things that we have domesticated our relationship with. But there's nothing that we can domesticate, and there's nothing that we can tame or make palatable or many times even fathomable about the light of outer space. I often think of Lovecraft's Color Out of Space, right?
Right.
And that even in the immense and tremendous beauty of these things, your face is melting, right? While you
Right.
witness it. Like you are mutating into a grotesque amalgam of something in the process of being exposed to the irradiation of space luminosity. So it is darker in the metaphorical in the sense, right, of than what it seems, and it is dark in meaning too, even in that brightness. Like there are no real happy endings in the long. I mean, I'm really selling Stellar Witchcraft right now, aren't I? Really making
I like
people
it. Yeah.
want a piece of this with the face melting and the no happy endings. But I mean, I would your life can be immeasurably improved by the depthful confrontation of things that we have no capacity to define or describe, especially if you are someone who has found yourself kind of persistently bored with the things that you are told are meant to feel novel or thrilling or push the limits of experience, right? I rely a lot on anyone who knows me. I bring in Hellraiser like way too much, or Clive Barker references, Lovecraft references, in general, far too much as ways of speaking to the relationship that and this is another word I use too much, which is la conjouissance, this coalescing point of ecstatic, blissful pleasure and unbearable transcendental pain, right? Which I think is integral to the experience of witchcraft, and I think is a very embodied and felt experience for those who we would call witch, right? These people that are monstrously alien from the human experience in many ways. And this is mimicked, this is reflected, this is mirrored, and perhaps originated, spawned in space itself. So this is why, for sure, it's not for everyone, but for the people it is for, there is nothing else really that comes close to that feeling of uncanny and annihilating homeness.
For sure. For myself, I can only talk here, and so I maybe just want to see what you have to say about this. But is it odd to look at the night sky and immediately think of death? Like there's so many traditions that have said that the stars exist as campfires
Yeah.
of our ancestors, but they're not they're not campfires. A lot of times to me, they don't seem like welcoming campfires. They feel like the thing that you need to go to because you are craving their warmth. And so that is, they're like, I don't know if that makes sense to people, but it's not that I feel like charging towards death. But when I see and I'm confronted with this idea of the campfire, the campfires of our ancestors in the stars, there is something very dark and death oriented about them. What do you think about something like this, Sasha?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. Even I mean, I think it is perhaps a sane and normal human response to look at at this night sky, and know that for the majority of us, especially those of us that are not equipped with all of the regulatory gear and vehicles necessary to traverse space, engaging too much with it, in any material way ensures immediate death, right? Um, we can look at the stars and see, yes, the campfires of our ancestors, and we can look at the stars and also be like, wow, a lot of astronauts died out there. There's literally corpses floating around in the anti gravity, right? Um, the For me, at least, the feeling I have when I look at the night sky is the feeling I have when I look at the ocean, and when I think about especially the deep ocean, the deep sea, like really penetrating pelagic depths, which is that we are not meant to exist or live there. Like it cannot be done easily, it cannot be done safely, and that if one endeavors to do so, they do not return the same. Right? They must be remade in those uncanny, ghastly, alien ways. There's a real connection between the ocean and the deep of space for that very reason. Um, and when we think about and the ocean is the largest cemetery on Earth. And for me, uh, space and the night sky is a reflection and a mirrored image of that cemetery.
I love it. That's great stuff. Normally, when I have folks on my podcast, I'll give them a whole list of questions beforehand. But something just came to mind as you were talking recently, Sasha, and that is this idea of panspermia, which is that somehow life that we know, the things that we see around us, everything that is imbued with breath and blood and all of these things did not come from this planet. It was not homespun. That somehow this thing, this gift that we all have called life, came from outside of this atmosphere. What do you think about this idea of panspermia and for all life on what we call planet Earth, our home?
As a lover of science and a lover of speculative theory both, my answer to that is that I don't know, and I wouldn't be surprised. Like if it were to be released in a big State of the Union address that we had this sort of revelation and it was confirmed, I think I would receive that as like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I've also found that I think in life we have to play to our strengths and work with what we do know, and build on that, right? And I do a lot of abstraction and I do a lot of experimentation and I play with a lot of things that can only be sort of corroborated over a process of time. But I have found that as far as these like really tremendous big questions go, especially these that I think can whip up a real fanfare of polarizing opinions, I found it easier to just accept that I don't know. That's really challenging for some people. Some people have a really hard time with not having a definitive or firm answer. I find that I really thrive when I have no definitive, or maybe it's a Libra thing because I don't have to make a decision if there's no definitive or firm answer in either direction. Um, but I find it much easier to take that as one of the exciting possible choose your own adventure outcomes of life, while holding that a multitude of other realities could be just as easily substantiated. So
For sure. I just thought I would toss it out there. I find the idea itself to be a very toothsome one, and it's well worth sitting with it, particularly as one stares up at the night sky around this time of the year, in which the stars they seem far brighter as the days become shorter. So
totally.
let's talk about the thing that you just brought up, that you are a fan of contemporary science. So how important is contemporary astronomy, not astrology, contemporary astronomy, to something like stellar witchcraft?
I want to say really quickly to that last point, the more I think
Sure.
about it, I find that there is a little part of my heart that would love for that to be the case, right? Because I feel like it would answer certain questions I have too about why do so many of us feel a a melancholic nostalgia as well for other planets, other worlds, other places of origination. And it would explain certain things that I have recognized in stellar spirits or even thonic spirits' association with stars or willingness to work with us, right? If there was some strange extension there too. But how important astronomy is, I mean, it's more important to stellar witchcraft in many ways than astrology would be. At
Okay.
least, and like, okay, so let me clarify. For my definition, my way of relating to stellar witchcraft, astronomy is more important than astrology is. It's actually forced me to prioritize astronomy, period, which I'm ashamed to admit this. Relatively neglected in a lot of my astrological work. I am definitely from the generation where we've had programs that calculate our charts. I have amazing friends and peers that can do all of the techniques and calculations and chart drafts, etc., by hand. And I love them, but I mentioned earlier, not a math person here. So when I found there was an easier way out, I took it. Now in my 30s, I'm having to relearn a lot of the astronomical related stuff much harder. Wish I had done a better job focusing when I was in my late teens and early 20s. But I would say that stellar witchcraft itself is actually more of a combination of witchcraft and astronomy than witchcraft and astrology.
Okay.
Especially if we're looking at like conventional representations in astrological magic as an extension of astrological image magic.
Okay, so can we pull that apart for folks, because maybe they have not come to realize what something like image magic is. Can you explain just very briefly what image magic means?
Totally.
Yeah.
So astrological image magic is what is often being alluded to when you hear people talk about astrological magic. And what that means is it originated in a talismanic tradition, something that you would see, for instance, in the Picatrix, something that you would see in Agrippa, something that you would see in the Shams al Marif, these sort of texts, where they talk about, for instance, a certain planet, or even occasionally one of the Beheni stars, or a particular lunar mansion or decan that is associated with a symbol image, something that can be carved at a particular time, usually like the particular planet or star or face or whatever on the midheaven with good lunar configuration, etc., that would imbue a material object, usually like a piece of precious metal or a precious gemstone, with a spirit associated with that planet, face, star, etc., that would be used for magical purposes and ends. So that is what astrological image magic is, which is what is often being referred to with astrological magic talismans, right? There are other forms of astrological magic that is more theurgy based, right? I usually refer to that more as astrology, the sort of worshipful, oh, I'm going to do the Orphic hymn or one of the prayers or invocations from the Hygromantea or the Heptameron, etc., on this planetary day during this planetary hour when the planet in question, is dignified by whatever, whether it's essential dignity or whether it's by sect or it's or angle, et cetera, right? So these are the more conventional, and it's funny to even say that because saying the more conventional astrological magic feels like a really kind of like cute and novel thing to get to do in 2023, when
Right.
even 5 years ago this was like a pretty taboo and transgressive practice, right? We have much to thank of the Copics for popularizing that in the way that now pretty much everyone is engaging in some form of astrological magic, or engaging with talismanic materia, etc. But this was still, a very new and cutting edge and was not accepted by most of the astrological community. I probably have like 20 years before any of my stuff starts to get recognized, but as perhaps part of an astrological tradition, which is why I've been very careful to communicate or articulate it as stellar witchcraft, as something separate and apart.
For sure. I like what you said earlier in response to the question I asked before this, is that astronomy and witchcraft is more important to the idea of stellar witchcraft than astronomy and witchcraft being. So let's add another ingredient here then. And I'm going to tell a little bit of a story, and I hope this doesn't blindside you at all, Sasha. But one of the first times that I interacted with you, I was doing what was called a Fistful of Fairies
Yeah,
series, and you'd approach me basically saying like, do you have all the guests for this? And I said, I'm sorry, I do. And you mentioned the Shining Ones. So let's add this ingredient to stellar witchcraft. The Shining Ones. Who are they, Sasha?
absolutely. I mean, this was one of the it's very special to me because before I really delved into and committed to the stellar witchcraft praxis, a lot of my foundation comes from my lineages and my practices in fairy seership, right? And one of the subjects and the themes that came up over and over again, one of the conversations that I was just hit over the head with, was the relationship between the fair folk of every culture, like we're talking globally, right? And the stars. And this isn't to speak to every particular fairy or fairy like spirit, obviously, but by and large, and it's someone who's written about this in a very accessible way based on her particular gnosis, is Morgan Daimler. And I recommend exploring them for folks that are interested. But this term, when I say the Shining Ones, it has a really specific implication when I'm using it, which is it, and it's a popular expression to describe the fairy folk in general or fairy spirits in general. But when I'm using it, I'm specifically speaking about the fairy like spirits that are inextricable from their stellar relationships, pacts, and affiliations. I am in the long term process of this grimoire, and I've also been able to, in the process of writing this, sort of organize many different types of fairy like spirits into particular stellar courts and kingdoms, draw particular associations therein as well, especially with the four Persian royal stars, which seem to be very, very important. That being Aldebaran, Regulus, Fomalhaut, and Antares. Those four in particular create these sort of banners or these kingdoms through which all myriad of spirits can often be organized through and around and beneath, right? But there seems to be a real association, especially with noble or courtly fairy like spirits too, with these royal stars, and then with particular constellations. And I've even through my work found a series what I refer to as like the primary quote unquote fairy stars, being Alcyone in the Pleiades, Denebades and Cygnus, Alphecca in Corona Borealis, and Sualosin in Delphinus. So there's this profound connection. I mean, this is also really interesting. I don't know for the Lord of the Rings fans at home too, right? Like even the elves within Tolkien's universe have this pretty profound relationship with a stellar religion or worship or orientation too. And when we look at a lot of folklore, there's a way in which the pale ones are described that imparts very similar language to starlight, or the folklore and mythos around phenomena like aurora borealis, right? This is a prolific and powerful and intimate relationship which has allowed me to kind of at this point divide the fairy and fairy like spirits that I engage with or encounter between those that have stellar pacts, affinity, affiliations, and so on, and those that are much more phonic, very sublunar, very terrestrial, very land based. And that itself has been massively illuminating and is something that several of my peers that are involved in the engagement and the work with the stellar firmamental stuff, but also have their own initiatory backgrounds in fairy seership or related lineages, and these being like traditions. Like for me, I'm my tradition is a Serbian Vlach tradition. In particular, that's ancestral, and the people that I'm talking about too, for them, a lot of them are Scottish or Northern European particular traditions. These are not contemporary schools of quote unquote fairy seership. I want to make that pretty clear. Um, but they have also recognized really similar patterns and trends here as far as that goes as well.
Wonderful. It's no matter where you go these days, the fairies are always they're kind of near, and that they have a part to play in how you have a relationship with the stars. I think is really quite fantastic, and something that I think more people need to look into. Particularly, we a lot of us, particularly when we get to looking at fairies, we want to stay like very local, like they're quote unquote nature spirits, but there is
No, they're
just
not.
some there's just some there's just something that's like they also have this relationship to death, and they also have
Yes.
this relationship to stars, and it's all part of the package, and how one pulls it apart is up for experimentation and personal, individualized, idiosyncratic investigation. So
Well,
uh,
people make the same mistake, I think, with the fair folk as they do with stellar spirits, which is that assuming they are inherently friends here to help you or have a relationship with you, and that they don't have ulterior motives that are oftentimes relatively traumatizing to like reflect upon, right? Um, there's there are many ways in which individuals that have good boundaried and close relationships with the fair folk are well suited for stellar witchcraft as a result of having to work with very inhuman and alien consciousness. The fair folk don't work by human rules, right? Or morals or mores or cultural values. And they have a sense of logic and an agenda that is entirely their own. And that is very similar for stellar spirits too. I think there's why there's such an affinity there. There's such a connection. And that's even substantiated when we look at folks like Jacques Vallée, right? And the connection between alien abductions and fairy kidnappings, etc. And okay, what's the real difference there? I will say, in my experience, there is a difference between stellar alien spirits and stellar fairy spirits, but they are as brethren, cousins, etc., not like different species entirely.
Got it. Wonderful. I have to ask because you recently released a book through Hadean Press called The Red Dreaded Spindle, an astrolator's guide to the stinger stars of Scorpius. So, what are some of the constellations which are important to you and to this same degree to stellar witchcraft in general?
Oh, to the same. Okay, so it was about because of the constellations which are important to me. I was about to list every constellation basically in the sky. um, I am probably, aside from because of the pamphlet, the constellation I would say that I am most known for at this point is probably Hydra, who I am working with Meg Keen on a book around right now, who I've taught classes on, written a lot about. I'm doing a keynote in Astromagia next month on this constellation as well. So this is a place that I am most known. She claims she steps up to be sort of the mother of the stellar witchcraft that I am midwifing into the world in the way that I am. But the one that is the behind the scenes most intimate and closest constellation for me is Cygnus, which is the Swan constellation, and for me is very much associated with the class of fairy spirits for whom I am most pacted to, that I am most intimate with on a more personal level. Beyond that, like in the day to day, the way it shows up in my life, the Leo constellation is tremendously important, and the majority of the stars of Leo show up very imminently in my own life and my own like nativity. But Razal Hog of and Ophiuchus as a constellation, Corona Borealis, Cetus, Andromeda, Pegasus, Gemini, Crater, Aquarius. I mean, all of these play. I mean, all of them have their Urania's mirror related pictographs on some of my shrines right now. All of them are worked with and used, but the ones that I like come back to basics, the daily work that is usually done between Cygnus and Hydra, depending on really the season and the mood and what is necessary.
Got it. So let's take that word that you just used, work. We've talked a lot so far, and we're 47 minutes into this, for about 45 minutes into this conversation. So where does the work come in? We've given up people the way to try and conceptualize a certain kind of stellar witchcraft, but when does ritual come into how you interact with these celestial entities?
So much of this for me ends up being in an oniric practice, right? I have a really intense dream life, so I am often given pieces of rites or engaging in rites, etc., while in a dream state. But I'm also regularly constructing and participating in rites that are almost entirely of like my own creation. Oftentimes, sometimes, they can be inspired by or use a scaffolding of other existing rituals or structures, or might be influenced by some of the other witchcraft or magical traditions that I am initiated into. And some of that can be very orderly and formal, but honestly, so much of it involves for me entering into ecstatic and trance states through various practices and that I have that allow me to cross this like firmamental hedge, and explore these places. So a lot of my work, if like someone were to walk into my witchcraft room where a lot of this happens, they would likely be treated to like a weird but relatively unspectacular looking scene of me like rocking or laying on the ground, making weird sort of noises with my eyes either open and like crossed or closed, right? And so a lot of it is happening outside of the physical body. I have tools that I really like to use, sort of, but it's mostly because I like pretty things and I like to collect stuff. Um, the thing about witchcraft is you shouldn't need that much ornament, right, in order to do the thing. So much of it is about the ability to commune, the ability to work with spirits, the ability to leave the body, to shapeshift into a form that allows you to enter into the places that you wish to go, wish to be. I have certain tools that are important for me, like an Alfaradin Hydra talismanic rattle that I use to help enter into those states and call down starlight, for instance, so that I can travel up and through it. Or I have a particular, I won't name the animal, but particular animal pelt that I use that is very important to my fairy seership lineage, that allows me to shapeshift into forms that allow me to do some of this work across that sort of like ozone hedge. But by and large, the people people often ask, oh, how long or how ornate are these particular ceremonies and rituals? And that is, I think, oftentimes the influence of ceremonial magical traditions, right? Coming through and being transposed onto witchcraft. And that's not entirely true, because if you look at, for instance, the Dragon Book of Essex, right? We have profoundly long, ornate, detailed, timed, from hours to month long related things, or year long related things going on in there. So I'm not trying to make a by large sweeping statement about witchcraft not being ceremonial the way ceremonial magical traditions can be. But stellar witchcraft is much more of a fusion between being able to ride the body out of the body. Uh, we can't simply go to outer space the way someone wanting to do wood based witchcraft could do in a forest, right?
Right.
And so you have to learn how to transmute the vehicle into something that allows you to be in space and place without, again, having an obscene amount of money that allows you to take a little rocket trip, right?
Yes, not all of us own a giant multinational corporation that can just buy a
Yes.
rocket and go into space.
Yes. If you're trying to grab a ride with Starlink, let me know how you do it. But in the
Right.
meantime,
So here, let's get to something that I find one of the most striking parts of the work that I've come across of yours, that at least that I've engaged with, and it's unabashed and unashamed in the way that you portray it, and I absolutely love it. But how important are things like story and storytelling to your form of stellar witchcraft?
oh yeah, Stellar Witchcraft can't exist without story and storytelling. And again, okay, my version, the work that I'm doing. I want to clarify
Yes.
that. I'm
Yes.
not trying to speak to any and every culture's exploration of stellar witchcraft, but the stellar witchcraft and deep space witchcraft that I am exploring cannot exist without story and storytelling. These are the focal points through which we can allow the profound reality of these worlds and these spirits which like populate them to come through. Um, if they want to be realized and recognized, right? For those stories to be told, for those magics to be engaged with, for those lessons to be learned. Quite frankly, one has to be able to one has to be able to imagine something like so strange, so awful and wonderful can exist in order to recognize it when it introduces itself to you. Um, and one must be able to lead with like curiosity and wonder instead of just terror or xenophobia when availed with those opportunities. So having frameworks that are reliant upon narrative approaches and world building and speculative dimensions and monstrous characters actually resources you with this entire arsenal of tools for in the moment engagement. It allows you to have already pictured yourself as the protagonist or the antagonist or the anti-hero. I'm not trying to live your life for you. In in the story where you can encounter such bizarre, beautiful, terrible things. It is, I think, in many ways the training ground for the act of stellar witchcraft is having a formative or at least parallel engagement with storytelling.
For sure. If people were to say, head to the public aspects of your Patreon account or even your Instagram page, they would notice certain things rising up, and that's the work of Clive Barker, who I believe just had his birthday 2 days ago or something like that. And in
Yeah, the fifth.
particular, yeah, okay. And in particular, his conception of Cenobites. What is it about this work of fiction that is so integral to your stellar witchcraft?
Douglas, this could be an entire episode of its own, and I am going to be as concise and parsimonious as possible. So
Sure,
bear
sure,
with me. I'm going
definitely.
to the thread of special interest enthusiasm that just flooded the banks of my body. So I have been a absurdly over the top Clive Barker, but also Hellraiser. I mean, my quote unquote real origin story into a lot of witchcraft in this work was when I was coming out of high school and I spent some time in undergrad and community college. My goal was to be a cosmic horror writer. And Clive Barker was a huge reason for that, a huge reason why. Hellbound Heart, in particular, right? The story that Hellraiser is based from explores witchcraft, I think, in many ways better than most contemporary books on witchcraft do or will. Both the uh, inhuman, monstrous other that is constantly roiling inside of the individual that cannot figure out how to function in society in a passing way, right? Even if they're charming, even if they're liked by others, even if they're loved by others, there's a secret of otherness. And there's this need, this pressing, transgressing need for limit experience to push the threshold of sensorium in ways that are often not understood or recognized or totally approved of by a conventional and mundane society. When we look at how many of pretty much entirely and exclusively, except for folks like Angelique, the Cenobites are the as priests and priestesses are the transmogrified remainders of these humans, right? We start to understand how many of these witch spirits were once witches themselves. We're looking at literal witchcraft related initiatory experiences like the rending of flesh, the removal of bones, these sort of ecstatic and tortuous unions of being remade and repatterned into something much more in the nature of that which your spirit recognizes as selfness than, say, the people that are around you. Hellbound Heart also really speaks to, incorporates, and plays upon these feelings of queerness and otherness in profound ways, of sexuality and deviance and otherness, and of the ways that individuals who don't have outlets that are accepted to express these end up turning them inward, and that sort of fuels or perhaps propels one further into their initiatory experiences as a witch, right? Because one of the things that, going back to this idea of the witch being on the other hand, on the other end of the pointed finger, is that many of the people that even get called witch are called that because they are monstrous or other or deviant or freak, not because they actually have what we would say, like, quote unquote, witch blood, right? Or a practice of any kind. Um, So we're working with that dichotomy from the get-go, which is so useful for, I think, creating that sort of affinity that and the reason why this work, I think, is a work of witchcraft. And would be a work that, of course, David Cronenberg would pick up, a man who makes movies essentially about witches and witchcraft, even if it doesn't seem like that on the surface. I mean, Crimes of the Future was one of, I think, the best treatises on the witch body I think I've ever seen. Okay, see, this is what I'm talking about. I'm getting excited and derailed
Right.
again. Bringing myself back to center. But the Cenobites are very important too, because I started using to help people understand these sort of hierarchical structures I was seeing between stars and stellar spirits. The idea of Cenobites, the hell priests, the priests of a particular star, right? Um, and those being the spirits too of rank in legion of a particular star, and that star being Leviathan, the god form that the Cenobites worship, right? So I started understanding this trajectory is very helpful to introduce people to the sort of bureaucratic machinations of this work too, because like nowhere are we devoid of bureaucracy, right? If certainly if we weren't going to get out of it with demons, we're not going to get out of it with stellar spirits. And then I also began to recognize, and I can't speak too much to this, but I presented at a speakeasy of the dead over the summer on the relationship, the similarity, the kinship between Barker Cenobites and the spirits that I began working with unintentionally via corpse stars, dead and dying stars. And what a kinship there is between those, and there'll be more content on that in the future.
For sure, we can't go in too much. There is a work that is forthcoming, which will definitely go into this that people shall definitely check out. I'm going to throw another question that I have not put down on the list before, but it's not just Clive Barker. I want people to realize that if if they've never heard of your work before, Sash, and they go, it's not just Clive Barker lip service or fan service. You find the work of H.R. Geiger to be visually very, very striking.
Yes.
You have been covering The Shadow over Innsmouth on your Patreon, which would be a work of H.P. Lovecraft. I have to ask you, why is the horror of space so fruitful for, I'd say, long tenured, long lasting horror? If folks try to read something like Dracula these days, um, it's hard for them because it is so tethered in time to the era in which it is written, and yet something like H.P. Lovecraft, which has flashes that are Stoker-esque, the author of Dracula, there is a timelessness to the work of H.P. Lovecraft, and a lot of that is this idea of the cosmic horror itself. So why do you think that the stars in the night sky can provide such a wonderful platforms for these works of art and horror, which really strike us in a way that other works can't?
This is still the most unexplored frontier, right? Aside from maybe certain parts of particular jungles, the bottom of the ocean, etc. Space is something that one cannot over know, cannot know too much about. The more we know, and we know so much more today than we did even 20 years ago, right? Thanks especially to innovations like the Webb telescope. It is it is as if the more we begin to encounter, the more we begin to explore and know, the the greater the gravitas of our unknowing kind of humbles us, right? And when we are oversaturated by information, right? When we can Google the answer to most questions within a few seconds, when we are inundated consistently by visual stimuli, information stimuli, news stimuli, social media, influencer stimuli, all these different things, I believe there is a perennial, but really right now very acute yearning for something that is not accessible immediately, or at least without perhaps immense risk to it. I mean, why do people also love watching horror movies in general, going on roller coasters? We crave the cathartic experience of encountering something which humbles us, which which I think, to use an expression, like, strikes the fear of God in us to a certain degree, right? And I think that is a thing that space is very capable of doing, because the vastness of it is not anything that could ever be fully known. It cannot be fully explored. You can never get bored or tired or full of it. You can't lose the novelty of something for whom its newness, its strangeness, its ever shifting changeness. I mean, even the space that we meet and encounter is dead space, right? When we think about how long it takes for light to travel, even the stars that we meet with now have died millions of years ago, even if the impressions we're getting are them in their life, right? Um, when we think about that sort of non-linearity, when we think about the eviscerating beauty of smallness, of futility, of finitude that we have in comparison to something that is so tremendously vast and ultimately uncaring about us. I think that it is something that we both feel a timeless terror around, and also it's profoundly easy to eroticize too, right? Like, there's something very, I think, sexy in the way that space dominates the imagination and the unconscious.
Definitely. That's very well put. I love that explanation, and there's certainly much to pull there. It's true, and in the sense that we are getting more and more familiar with space, with this idea of these pretty wonderful photographs that we get, but they cannot convey the absolute awesomeness of what we are looking at. And a lot of times, what we are looking at, as you explain, is things that are long dead, things that are not there. We are looking at pictures of a cosmic cemetery,
Yeah.
if you will. So let's pull it back in here to round things out about Stellar Witchcraft. You've sent me some resources of yours and some writings of yours to just try and get my head around everything that is involved in your form of Stellar Witchcraft. But you say that this looking forward is the attitude that defines Stellar Witchcraft. What do you mean by this?
Yeah. The message I've received over and over again, from the work I've done with these spirits, is that neophobia is the death of this type of witchcraft. One can't spend their time romanticizing and prioritizing exclusively the voices of the magicians and witches who have come before. And that while history is essential, right, and important, I'm not trying to argue that at all. Traditions are meant to be built upon, innovated, expanded, and experimented with. Everything that we now salute or hold on a pedestal as the pinnacle of a particular tradition or practice that we swear by the efficacy of, right? All the grimoires that are considered the be all and end all of these things were once strange, new, innovative, uncorroborated experiences, right? And that and I want to be very careful in the way I say this, because there's so many people that I really cherish, for whom the historical practice of magic, right, is so life-giving and nourishing. But that isn't what I've encountered for this particular magical current. We have to think the way of science fiction writers, wherein the willingness to muck around in both the imaginal and the imagination ends up in a resultant sort of like prophetic or oracular soothsaying, where through the potential to dream of future worlds, we actually are able to project ourselves magically into them. So one has to be comfortable, quote unquote, fucking around and finding out, right? In order to move this forward, one has to be able to welcome in neon and steel and artificial intelligence, as much as uh dusty tomes that have proven themselves invaluable for millennia, as much as and as a particular magical wand or ceremonial sword, or any of these other particular factors that have been used for a long time. This is also a witchcraft that needs to factor in or at least leave itself open to being done in different worlds, on different planets, in space, right? What does it look like to imagine in stellar planetary astrological timing from the face of a different from a mental entity? Like, these are things that we need to consider if we want the work to persist, to move forward, and if we want to survive the sort of extinction process that happens. I think as we enter what we're in right now, which is the astrological age of air, where strange speculative ideas begin to take more and more form, where we get this sort of idea of the Star Trek holodeck, where you can imagine the reality you're entering into. I think the worst thing that we can do is look at all the tools that science, whether for better or worse, right? It's too soon to tell, but all these tools that are being veiled to us, and say, no, no, not for me. I'm going to stick to just these things they were using in 1496. Nah, I'm going to also use the AI. I'm also going to use the robots and the chips and whatever else it requires, right, in order to do the most efficacious magical work.
Fantastic. Now, something else that you wrote that really struck me was you said that stellar witchcraft screams out for hybridity. What does this mean?
Yeah, this work can't and like simply does not exist in a vacuum, right? It can't and it doesn't exist as a tradition independent of your other practices or traditions. For myself, I've mentioned, that I am in multiple traditions, and this is maybe my public face. I'm very quiet for the most part about the other things, but all of these spirits that I engage with interact with each other and have relationships with each other, and I incorporate tools from those practices into my stellar witchcraft practice, and that's what gives it fuel, and that's what propels it further, and that's what creates more and more networks of innovation around it. Like, all weird miasmic outer space effluvia seeks to incorporate and subsume and consume and blend with and devour and spread into and across everything at all times. And, like John Carpenter's The Thing, capture all the disparate threads of the imagination and reality alike until it becomes patterned with these memories of all the sorcerous methodologies, using them in whichever way it sees fit, right? Stellar witchcraft is the alien in the room with your other practices that is observing, learning, and also assimilating these other things so that it has more ways of communicating with you or achieving its end, and vice versa. In turn, you begin to have more simulacra and symbolic language in which to communicate with it.
Fantastic. John Carpenter's The Thing. It just brings to mind so many wonderful ideas. I like that, having that is the stellar witchcraft can be that strange interloper in your magical world,
Yep.
just waiting. I love it. It's great stuff. So I'm just going to say this. I find your work very, very inspiring, Sasha,
Oh,
in the sense that um, I'm gonna talk for myself here a little bit. I kind of have this love-hate relationship with contemporary astrology. A lot of the things that I like, the myths of that get entwined with contemporary astrology and all of these things. There's been over the last little while this whole Hellenistic astrology and the work of Chris Brennan and all of these kind of things. But I also have I have a hate for ways in which people tell me I should conceptualize
yeah.
with astrology. And so what you are doing is, I find, incredibly influential in the sense that I can see a very individualized and idiosyncratic way of interacting with the stars and the night sky that personally makes me want to try something like that of my own, and not to take anybody else's word for how one interacts with the stars and the constellations and everything that goes on up there, to try and collect my own stardust, and create a work of my own. So I find all of what you're saying very, very compelling, but I have to ask, how would you advise others to begin to create a stellar witchcraft or even a new and different individualized, idiosyncratic spiritual understanding of the celestial sky?
I would so this is again very, very me based. I would start with the cosmic horror and the science fiction and the speculative fiction. I would start with there's an emphasis here on fiction, and that's not because I'm telling people to go out and engage with something that isn't real as a foundation for a practice which is evisceratingly real, but rather because this work requires a permissibility of things existing that you are more likely to be able to accept or meet if you have a background with this type of work, as opposed to coming based in a more traditional astrological framework, right? There's time for excellent resources like Bernadette Brady and Diana Rosenberg and the Vedic resources on nakshatras and Arabic manzils. And those are all really, I think, important. And they're also very important for sort of finding your way around or understanding in the great arc of time the stories told about the sky. But those are like rungs on the ladder of stellar witchcraft. They are not the direction that stellar witchcraft is climbing toward, right? Cultus Sabbatai, is often a pretty complimentary framework, but again, often rests on the laurels of an almost like parochial ceremonial nature and really focuses primarily on the stars of Draco and other circumpolar constellations, with little regard for other fixed stars and constellations as well as deep space objects. So that's not going to help you, again, unless you're looking at a very small slice of the sky and planning on very specific ways of engaging that are also, to be fair, just as high risk as any of the stellar witchcraft that I'm talking about is. That's where you want to look to genre literature as an entryway into the phantom worlds of out there. Uh, my favorite resources, like I mentioned earlier, for understanding the folklore around stars exist in those folk astronomical compilations. And what's special about that is you can find insightful opportunities to recognize the stories, superstitions, etc., practices even that your ancestors had around their fear and worship of like the shining ones. Um, but you are more likely to understand the kind of spirits you come across in stellar witchcraft by reading something like Hellbound Heart, by watching films like Under the Skin, right? By reading Dreams in the Witch House, you know, these sort of ways of engaging, by watching the films of David Cronenberg, for instance, than you are by reading a book on Hellenic mythology.
So, one final question here, Sasha. What does something like if say somebody listened to this entire episode and they get to this part, which is the end of the episode, and they're like, I like what these people are saying. I like what Sasha's saying. What can people expect if they wish to engage with your work or with stellar witchcraft for, let's just say, the next 3 months of 2023? And indeed, where do you think stellar witchcraft a la Sasha Ravitch goes in the not too distant future?
Well, this is funny timing because I'm actually taking a month hiatus. Um, so if they want to, they can still engage with literally years of material, and that's through, for instance, my Patreon, uh, which one could, as my beloved colleague and dear friend Meg Keen likes to say, one could read it for like years and still have too much. And then there's a Discord server associated with that, where then you also get over 250 other people's amazing research and personal lived experiences and discoveries, etc., going on. So that would be a way to engage in the meantime, though I'm still updating that Patreon each week with new planetary witchcraft right now content. But I will also be a keynote speaker at Astromagia in November, presenting on Constellation Hydra and in particular erotic stellar witchcraft with her. the trajectory right now of this work will be shifting a little bit into winter related stellar mysteries. We'll be looking again a little bit more at corpse stars. We'll be looking at some particular wild hunt associated stellar spirits and the work within that particular milieu and nexus. We will be exploring. I'm trying to think too, because I'm working on several books and pamphlets, preparing things for the next round of conferences. I'm going to be doing more read-alongs of different short stories and novellas with my patrons as well, which we do, which is really fun. Everyone goes around and reads different passages of stories by Lovecraft, by Barker, etc. And I'm going to be doing for my my patrons a Stellar Witchcraft 101. What the fuck is it? Is it worth it? What should I expect? How do I know what's going on? Etc. related workshop in the winter as well. That would be bringing things back to a really core foundational level, and allowing people to, using the rules of kink, safe, sane, consensual as much as possible relationship with the vast wildness of out there.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And there was something that you put out recently that's called "So You Think You Want to Be a Stellar Witch: What It Means to Be Remade in Starlight." And I'm going to be putting it in the show notes for everybody in this episode. So please give that a read to begin with. I think it does a really wonderful way. And Sasha is a fantastic writer as
Oh,
well.
thank you.
So everybody have a read of that, and please consider what Sasha puts up there. And so, Sasha, we're at the end here, and I feel like, again, we could probably talk for another 3 hours. But where can people find you, your work, all of your things? What do you get up to? Are you still doing consultations? What kind of consultations do you do? Give me everything. Give me the whole business card, the whole thing.
Oh boy, yeah. I am still doing consultations. I do quite a bit of them, though. I will give folks a disclaimer that I believe I'm booked out through May of 2024 currently.
Whoa,
Still,
nice.
which is actually pretty good right now because it was for a year for a while. So I would recommend that folks try and swoop some of those summer ones sooner rather than later. The consultations are heavily based in spirit scrying. My most popular ones are the ones in which I identify the different stellar spirits that people have relationships with. And we walk through their messages, setting up relationships with them, and communicating the sort of stellar imaginal world that is cultivated around them by virtue of their stellar spirit relationships. That is to say, yes, everyone has relationships with stellar spirits because everyone has relationships by perinatal lanta with fixed stars. So that's a go-to. You can just count on that. As well as my haunted houses readings are very popular too, which is a assessment of the ancestral milieu of the dead, the curses and blessings that are happening as a result of that, different ways of ancestral elevation and remediation there, identifying particular ancestors to work with for that work, all through a necroastrological approach that I innovated as well. And again, that one is heavily seership and mediumship related. And then I have many different consultations. Those are the two most popular. Another really popular pair is the mirror one, which is for glamour magic, and it's an assessment taking in stellar spirits, lunar mansions, different astrological factors as well, and creating sort of someone's best face forward and which sort of spirits stand up for that witchcraft and work as well. And then the fair lamp of night is really popular, which is where we go in and I identify your lunar daemon, and ways to work with, enhance, etc. And we explore the lunar world, so that can become a place of applied sorcery that people can enter as well. So those are the popular consultations. I have mentees that I work with. I'm still very full as far as that goes. I probably won't be able to take on more mentees for a while, but those that are interested in something like that or being a retainer client, you will hear about that first, as well as all Materia Magica that I release via my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Sasha Ravitch. This is the main way to have any kind of relationship with me, especially because I'm pulling back on my social media participation. The Discord is one that I'm happily and actively involved in, as well as many other wonderful, wonderful, brilliant people that I am humbled to consider my work to be of any interest at all to them. And I, as far as I know and have been told, post very frequently. I mean, usually I'm posting multiple times a week on Patreon, a lot of it being fresh content. We have in-house teach-ins where I bring in other experts that are patrons to teach a class or a workshop that everyone gets to attend for free. Those are super fun. There's a bunch of those already on there that you can check out. We have our monthly lunacies where we do read-alongs. We have book clubs, and everything goes there first. But my social media, my Instagram is the only thing that I'm really active on, as well as Threads, which is just Sasha.Ravitch. And then I have a little cute, fun multimedia project with some friends. It's called Culta Sumatras Hydre, with periods in between each, that's dedicated to Hydra. So those are the primary places to find me right now, but you can go to my website, which is sasharavitch.com, or email me at sasha.ravitch@gmail.com as well. Wow, that was a lot of talking
Love
about
it.
myself.
No, it was great. Now, again, I have this question form that I give to all of my guests, and there's a couple of questions, and then you're like, I don't want to talk about this because they're going to be going into a book. Can you give us a taste, a little morsel, or even anything, a crumb of what is going on as far as your future writing projects, Sasha?
Yeah, so we have the Hydra and Witchcraft book that I mentioned earlier, which is a collaboration between Meg Keane and I, that is born out of the like pretty overwhelming success and excitement people had around our In the Belly of the Beast Hydra and Witchcraft workshop that we led back at the end of July. I have the ongoing Stellar Witchcraft grimoire that I'm working on that has one of a kind talismanic symbols, sigils, glyphs, and drawings by Jay Hamadi as well happening. And I have in process like four or five different monograph pamphlet related projects. So it's going to be a very busy winter full of a lot of writing, but luckily I'm hoping that a New York winter weather situation makes it more appetizing to stay inside and write than it is to go out and explore. So
If it's not going to be winter in New York, it'll definitely be everything getting more expensive.
yeah, one way or the other, the writing's getting done, right?
Exactly. Sasha, this has been wonderful. And again, we just merely scratched the surface, but I love that I was able to have you on the show and to talk about an aspect of magic that I think that's not represented at all. A lot of times the aspect of astrology that most people are familiar with, it's overbearing. Everybody knows almost like what it is, even if you have like a cursory knowledge of it. It's well represented. So I'm really glad that we were able to have a different perspective on the celestial bodies and what we can call like the night sky, because there's there is a lot out there that is rife for exploration, particularly at this moment in time. And we are indeed living in very interesting times. So I thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing absolutely everything and for kicking off the season of spooky that is October and early November. And I should hope that if I was to ask you to come back on the podcast at some point in the not too distant future, that you'd be willing to do so.
This was so much fun, Douglas. It would be a pleasure to come back. It was a pleasure to do this. It was an honor. I'm a huge fan and have been for a long time of the work you're doing and your charming and amiable eloquence. It's a lot to be both very I mean, I was so impressed even by the questions you sent over too. So it's a lot to do that and still still be fun to talk to. So good
Okay.
job on finding that rare and special balance.
Thank you so much, Sasha. Folks, please find all of Sasha's work. Again, it's been a long time since another figure within magic and the occult who's got a lot of word of mouth. I'm just going to say everybody's talking about, when are you getting Sasha on your show, Doug? When is Sasha going to be there? And even Sasha was like, can I come on your show? I'm like, we have to find the right thing. We have to find the right thing. And eventually it's just like, you know what? We just have to pull this off, and we have to get you on the show. So I'm so glad that it was finally able to happen. I will have all of the links to every place that you can find Sasha's work on the internet. Should be on the website that is for this episode, and that is available at whatmagicisthis.com. Head there. So much stuff. I've got show notes for this episode. They're going to be very, very, very slight, because truly, at this point in the game, Stellar Witchcraft is a somewhat pioneering field within magic and the occult, and so all roads seemingly lead back to Sasha. So please check that out on my webpage for this episode, and you can just find all that Sasha gets up to. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, you'll find a link to my Twitter account, my Instagram account, and my Facebook account. I'm pretty present on Twitter for the most part, but getting a little bit more present on the Instagram. Facebook is just kind of like an afterthought for me, so it's basically my Instagram account, but on Facebook. So I'll just put it that way. Do you think that I'm doing something kind of cool, something kind of fun, something at least interesting and worthy of your support? Well, you can support me in 3 ways. I'm going to tell you what they are, as I do in every single one of these episodes. So follow along, or I don't know, skip to the end. Who knows what people are doing these days. But if you could listen, I would appreciate it. And even more, I would appreciate if you could find your way to supporting me. The best way of supporting me is through Patreon. That's patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com. Find any number of the links there. My Patreon account is very special. I also have a Discord community that is wonderful. If you become a patron, then you can go to that Discord. It is great. We have a lot of really wonderful people, and a lot of people on my Discord are also people you will interact with on Sasha's Discord, because everybody knows where to find the good shit, and both Sasha and I are peddling the good shit. I'll just say that. So also there on the Patreon, you get exclusive episodes. I do as much work, if not more work, for my Patreon offerings as I do for this regular main public free podcast. I have to say, my best stuff is truly on Patreon. I just released a pretty fun episode in which I talk about pretty much some of my favorite things that scared me. That's going to be like movies, TV, books, and even podcasts and radio things that have scared me in the past. So that's a really fun episode. I tend to release a special episode in and around Halloween, and I wanted to get this one out quite early so that you can engage with the kind of media and the kind of offerings that really scared the shit out of me throughout my entire life. So that's an example of the kind of episodes that I release. But I've also released other things about grimoires and how to start doing Solomonic magic, how to set up your own really easy Ouija board. I've got gardening for magical herbs from grimoires. It's just, I have so much great stuff on the Patreon, and it's only $7 a month. That's $7 American. That is basically 2 bags of pretzels. That is a used book from your local bookseller. Please shop and grab used books, but also support your local favorite podcaster, which is me. Anyhow, $7 a month. That's all. $7 American. It's like $10 Canadian. That's who knows how many euros. The euro is a funny one to me. Anyhow, but it's fairly cheap. I'm not, everybody else is raising their prices these days. I'm just keeping it at $7 because I really want to see you on the Patreon, not just, to help me live, because this is my job. This is what I do, but also because I want you to hear my best work, my best stuff. If I sound exasperated when I'm saying this, it's true. I put out some of the greatest stuff on the Patreon, and I'm just like, oh man, I wish more people could hear it. And so I would love for you, even for like 1 month, if you just sign up for 1 month and listen to all of my stuff. Trust me, you'll love it, and hopefully you'll see your way to supporting me a little bit more. But anyways, $7 a month, patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com. Click on any number of the Patreon links there. They're all over the place. And please support What Magic Is This, because it's my job. It's my living. I can't do this the way that I do that unless I have the support. So another way of supporting me is also through PayPal. head to whatmagicisthis.com, click the PayPal buttons. There's quite a few of them there. You can give me $5, $10, $20, any amount. Any amount helps. It all goes back into running this podcast for hosting and equipment and all of these kinds. Yes, I just bought some brand new equipment, so hopefully the show sounds pretty good because I got really good stuff, and it's I'm a couple of $1,000s in the hole. If you pay through PayPal, that goes right back into helping this podcast, and some people have been supporting me on the PayPal, so I really, really appreciate that as well. And thank you so much, everybody, for doing that, particularly Timothy. Thank you so much for your support, Tim. But yes, if you give me any amount of money through the PayPal, it just goes right back into making sure that the hamster stays on the hamster wheel so that this podcast can get released. So there's Patreon, there's PayPal, and finally, you can show your support by wearing your support, and that is by buying some of my merchandise. Just head to whatmagicisthis.com, click on the menu, click on merchandise, and you can find t-shirts, you can find buttons, you can find fridge magnets, you can find stickers, hoodies, so many things, tote bags. Unfortunately, the notebooks aren't being produced these days, which is a real shame because the notebooks were my favorite, so hopefully we'll see those come back. There's about 11 designs. I recently just put up a Halloween special design that people went gaga about. I just shared it yesterday. Truly, I worked on it and I finished it yesterday. I put it out and people were like, whoa, this is a cool label. So if you want yourself a What Magic Is This special Halloween logo mug, grab one of those. I know somebody was going to be grabbing that. Some people have already bought the t-shirts of this logo. Anyhow, 11 designs for What Magic Is This. Some of them are no doubt logos you've seen. Perhaps some of them you haven't seen. Go check them out at least and have a look. There's always sales happening on TeePublic, which is who produces my merchandise. So be sure to check it out every once in a while, and you might be able to grab a shirt on sale. But anyways, I don't see a ton of money from those, but I love seeing people wearing them. So if you do grab yourself a shirt, be sure to take a picture, put it up on Instagram, put it up on the Facebook, put it on the Twitter or the X or whatever they're calling it these days. Who knows? I would love to see you wearing my stuff because it's such a fun thing to see people wearing my things. And I understand why bands do it because it's like pretty awesome. And I would love to see you wearing your love of What Magic Is This by grabbing yourself a shirt or a hoodie or a baseball tee. Those are all there. Anyhow, all well and good, but the place that I would really love to see your support, and the one that I think that you would get the most benefit from, seriously, I'm not just saying this, would be my Patreon. So many great things. And in fact, here's like a little sample of that Halloween episode that I just released, things that scared the shit out of me. So please have a quick listen to this one. But I want to end this section of screen-based horror by basically being the most unoriginal person on earth and including a movie that scared the living shit out of me at the time watching the film and for a couple of weeks afterwards, and that would be The Exorcist. It's got to be The Exorcist. So I want no eye rolling from any of you, particularly if you're a horror movie fan or even just a movie fan. The Exorcist is a masterpiece in every way, shape, and form. I think that it is just one of the most spectacularly crafted films of all time. Yeah, some of the special effects are a little bit meh, but for the time they were wonderful. I think it is a fantastic movie. The scariest parts of the movie for me are not the things that everybody knows, the vomiting, the head spinning, the crucifix, and the crotch stuff. If you haven't seen The Exorcist, I'm just going to say, call yourself a magician and you haven't seen The Exorcist, shame on you. Just kidding. But, seriously, go watch the film. It's a cultural touchstone, as I talked about in the Ouija episode. The thing that I found the most scary in The Exorcist is like the banality and the way in which when we are out of our element spiritually, how we try to deal with things in the modern world. And if you've seen the movie, maybe you'll know what I'm talking about, but the stuff that I find scary, the endless tests on the character of Regan, I'm really hoping that everybody listening to this at least knows the plot of The Exorcist. Little girl gets possessed by the devil. She's in her early teens, I believe, and then they get an exorcist to get the devil out of the little girl. And two priests are there to do it. Anyhow, it's just the story of this woman getting this young lady getting possessed. Anyhow, yeah, there's lots of creepy stuff in it, but it's the other stuff. It's just how people cope in a modern society when confronted with evil, and how we're all out of our element. Even from an early age, that really, really bothered me. So I got, for some reason, my dad, I think for my birthday present, or maybe it was it might have been for Halloween. Yeah, now that I think about it, it was for Halloween, and it was the special edition VHS. It released in 1998. It was the 25th anniversary special edition. Yeah, my dad gave it to me. I just want to also clarify, that's not the one that was re-released in theaters in and around, I believe it was like 2000 or 2001. Pretty sure it was 2000, because I remember some of my high school friends, all three of them, were talking about how there were these weird cuts that would have the face of the character of Regan, the possessed Regan, that would just like flash momentarily on the screen really quickly at certain points of the film. And they're like, oh, it's so scary when her face pops up on screen. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? That was never in the movie that I saw. Anyhow, my dad gave me this VHS tape, 25th anniversary of The Exorcist, and I watched it on the same television that I saw that Seven movie that I talked about earlier. Very small, like 35 centimeters by 35 centimeters screen. It's tiny, attached VCR, and I watched it late at night, one night in autumn. And yeah, no real like boo, scare, although there's kind of some of that in the film, but it just really, really bothered me. It really got to me. And even it included like a little documentary, I believe, at the beginning that included segments that had Regan doing this weird spider walk down the stairs. That frightened me, even though it wasn't in the version that I watched, just in the little documentary. But all I have to say, if you haven't seen The Exorcist, you have to see The Exorcist. It is a crazy, great film. William Friedkin just passed away, so rest in peace, William Friedkin. You've made some of the most stunning movies of all time, including Sorcerer, a great film. Everybody watch it. Anyhow, I really do think that The Exorcist is something that if you live in North America and the dark stuff is interesting to you, even if you're a spiritual person, there are lessons and things to ponder that are bothersome within The Exorcist, and I absolutely love it. And I know a lot of people these days think that it's a very boring movie. I think that if you really give yourself into the ideas of The Exorcist, there are things in there that are truly terrifying, and things that I can't think of any other work of art within the visual medium that comes close to conveying those kind of ideas as The Exorcist. It is a brilliant film. Yeah, my dad's a weird one. He gave it to me. I was 15 when I saw it. It scared the shit out of me. But again, like I finished watching it late at night on a school night, just in my little bedroom. And yeah, it was. I did sleep that night, but I just could not stop thinking about it for the next couple of weeks. Terrifying, terrifyingly great, scary. If you haven't seen it, you gotta watch it. One of the best things ever. So that's a freebie there. Obviously, a list of media that scared me, and The Exorcist was on there. How unoriginal. Anyways, this is a sample of what I talk about in that episode, and it's 2 hours long. That Patreon episode is the longest Patreon episode I've ever done. And so if you're jonesing for more What Magic Is This, let me tell you, the Patreon has got you covered. $7 a month. That is it. That is all. Anyhow, love to see your support. But other than that, all of these things, each and everything that I've talked about, can be found, including all of Sasha's links, can be found at whatmagicisthis.com. Please head there. Folks, that's Stellar Witchcraft. Have an investigation. Go find everything that Sasha gets up to, because it's special stuff. It's timely, special stuff, and that's all I have to say. So until next time, everybody, we're going to be talking about in not the not too distant future here. We're going to keep going on with the spooky stuff, and the next one is going to be a humdinger as well. But until then, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay as luminous as the stars out there. Until next time, take it easy, everybody. Goodbye. Bye-bye.